Okay, I think we're live. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our expert panel webinar this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Just to let everyone know, this conversation, this webinar will be recorded, and a recording will be sent to all the participants tomorrow. So let's get started. We'll be talking today, and the name of the webinar is The Talent Puzzle and Strategies for Attracting and Retaining Top Employees. Just to quickly introduce the topic of the day and just to tell you all why we're here. It's a webinar co-hosted by Adams Multilingual Recruitment and Bridge Legal and Finance. Both Adams and Bridge work with international organizations, and we often see companies that, come to Adams for when they're looking to hire new staff, and in the same time they need, legal, financial, HR advice from Bridge. So throughout the past years, we realized that we have customers in common, and this is how we came to the idea to have an event where we can combine our specialized knowledge and address different parts of this of an employee journey, from hiring through their kind of being hired with a company. And since we're two hosts for the webinar today, offering complementary services, we also have a guest with us today coming to share an HR perspective from within a growing scale-up organization here in the Netherlands. So I'll do the proper introductions in just a minute. Actually, what I wanted to say, we started to plan this webinar a few months ago, and throughout the planning, we realized that the market keeps on changing. So we kept on adding and removing topics, and I think we ended with the final shape that we have today. Just a few practicalities. This will take, the conversation will take about 1 hour, so we do want to be quite on time with the end. We have a Q&A session within this 1 hour as well. So the conversation will be structured in two main parts. The first one will be more about the current market, expectations, and the trends. And then we move into the second one that's more focused on retention, the company culture, and the practical sides of having someone employed in your organization. And without further ado, let's do a quick introduction to our guest today. And I'll start on my left with Maureen Brinkman. She's the head of people at SkyDreams. Strong experience in HR for international organizations, different sizes of companies as well. Maureen is a strong believer in the positive impact of a diverse and inclusive workspace. And having worked with her for several years, I always appreciated passion, professionalism, the drive, but also the ability to drive change and make it happen. So welcome, Maureen. Thank you for being with us today. Moving on with a quick introduction to Bridge, and our panelists from Bridge. Bridge is a service firm, a so-called one-stop shop for international clients to take administrative, financial, and legal tasks out of their clients' hands as much as possible, so that those businesses can focus on setting up, scaling their organizations in the Netherlands and throughout Europe. And joining us from Bridge today, we have Esme Storm, who's an HR business partner, head of external human resources. Esme brings over 20 years of experience in HR, joined Bridge more than 6 years ago to bring that knowledge and practical HR experience to international employers, which she has done with pleasure and passion ever since. And also coming from Bridge, we have Roxanne Boltzmann, a senior associate with Bridge Employment Law Team. Has been part of Bridge for 5 years as well, and she brings Dutch expertise in employment law, advises international and national companies on a daily basis on everything related to hiring and firing of staff and every phase in between. And moving to Adams, Adams matches international companies here in the Netherlands with multilingual job seekers and international talent with specialism in areas such as marketing, customer service, finance, logistics, secretarial, human resources. Adams has a very international DNA as well. We have internationals working for Adams speaking more than 20 languages too. And from Adams, we have David. David brings 17 years of experience with Adams only. He's the current commercial director, a main point of contact, and if you come on this webinar from Adams, you probably have interacted with David throughout your career. David worked as corporate recruiter, and he knows everything that is to know about recruitment in general. I've been with Adams for 13 years. My role now is as a managing director, is part of the onboarding and recruitment strategies for our clients and candidates. So let's start with the first part, the expectations on the current market. And the question I have for you all is, how do you see the market now? What are the trends? And the first question is for David.
Yeah, and I think I'm attacking this from a talent perspective. I think before we look at the current market, we have to have a bit of a shout out to 2022. It was a phenomenal year if you were a job seeker. It was an exhausting year if you were a recruiter or a talent specialist. Talent was in demand and talent was demanding. I think I saw some UWV figures that said that there were 1.5 million people changed their jobs last year. So it was a crazy buoyant market. The second half of last year, I think, kind of began to impact into 2023. We saw all of these issues around the war, supply chain, energy and financial crisis. And then, of course, we had the US companies that started to make layoffs. So I think 2023 started in a fairly uncertain and worrying way. Layoffs in the Netherlands as well. We saw some big names with Philips and Bol.com, for example. But I think because we work in an agency, we see much more small, medium enterprises now also impacted. But we don't hear about this in the news. The promising thing from an agency perspective is that the UWV expects that because there's an uncertain climate, that temporary recruitment should begin to come to prominence again. They expect growth in this sector, which is good news for us. And I think it also helps with candidates who are immediately available. They can backfill positions. They can join companies quickly, and they can kind of bring an immediate benefit. It's still very, very hard to attract talent, though. The candidates that we talk to are super, super cautious. They're uncertain. They don't want to give up the security they have with a nice long-term contract, and they want to know really what's in it for them. A big change coming our way, though, is in generational recruitment. I think by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials, and they bring obviously a whole load of different challenges. I think we have to start speaking their language and understanding what their needs are, because they're very, very different to us baby boomers. Baby boomers, only me. There are some specific types of roles which are very much in demand. You know, anything that's tech related, digital roles, growth specialists, cybersecurity, these type of opportunities. But the biggest thing that I kind of discovered is that HR specialists are really in demand at the moment. And I think that really reflects the tough year that we had last year, and also a lot of challenges they're facing now in companies around talent, work-life balance, and long-term sickness.
And on that note, what are the trends when it comes to the legal side of things at the moment?
Yes, well, we have seen a shortage on staff over 2022 as well. And we believe that it will continue to be a challenge to attract employees in 2023. In our practice, we've seen a decrease in terminations due to business economic reasons. And therefore, we see that there is a focus on retention within companies, and therefore also employer branding is more important nowadays than it ever was, basically. And that also relates to sustainable employment. And what we see is basically three angles of that. How sustainable is a company with staff? Are there being offered sufficient development options within the company? And what's the company's impact on the society, and what opportunities are being offered there? And in that regard, a good example is that we see more green employment agreements within the sectors. Then you should think of, for instance, a bicycle plan instead of lease cars, or if you offer fixed voluntary days off, so you can contribute to the society in your time off, basically, on the account of the company. So that's all what we've seen, and especially in this market, retention is super important. So I think that this webinar will dive into that a little bit more. and we will come back to the details in due course.
Absolutely. And until we get to that point, I was wondering if we flip the question a bit around, what are candidates looking for? What is the feedback that you see at the moment from candidates, and what are their expectations?
Yeah.
Laurie.
I think what you really see, I think Dave said it as well, where people get so much more cautious than what it used to be, and especially in 2022, and also still now. I think we've never had so many places where we went through the full process, made the offer, everybody was happy, and it's like, I'm gonna stick where I am for now. And what we've really done is we've, for instance, outlined way more on that we're a bootstrap company, because we can show that we have sustainable growth, that we're not part of those tech scale-ups that actually are dealing with the layoffs. And I think what you really see is that it becomes way more important that you can really show what kind of culture you have, the career development as well. And I think the number one question that everybody asks almost straight away is, how's the work-life balance? What do we do with remote working? Is it full remote or hybrid? And is it actually really hybrid, or is it something we're saying to get you back in? So it's very, very detailed, I think, what candidates really want to hear, but obviously also what you want to share as a company.
Yeah, and from my side, I think actually the job post is the first thing that most of the candidates actually see. So it's really important that job posts are attractive. Not like back in my day when you listed a whole load of responsibilities and a whole load of requirements, but actually you're focusing on this as a selling document. So you're talking about the company, the mission, the values. And it's interesting to hear that 75% of job seekers are passive job seekers. So when you send out messages to these job seekers, it has to hit the mark straight away. Super important. And also employer reviews as well. Candidates are reading these. It's really important that you constantly monitor what your employees are saying about you, what your customers are saying about you at the same time. And making an application process super easy, mobile friendly, really important. Treat them like a customer, because ultimately they are a customer at that stage. And when you get to that final stage, make them an offer that's in line with their expectations. You know, if you make a lowball offer at the final stage, you'll never get that candidate back again. They'll be super offended. And give them time. If you make them an offer, give them time to think about it. It's a huge decision-changing career.
Yeah, people want way more time than before. Yeah.
What is a reasonable amount of time then to give to someone?
I always say either a weekend or probably 2 to 3 days, but it's difficult because some candidates are often in other recruitment processes. Ultimately, if you want that candidate enough and you pitched it enough to them, you sit back, you pray, you give them a little bit of time, don't put too much pressure on them.
Okay, and when we look at we see a lot of posts these days. We see a lot of information about the transparency that comes in as part of the recruitment process. Basically, should we have the salary advertised together with the jobs?
Yeah.
Where does everyone stand on that? Basically, what is the transparency that everyone expects in general?
I think it's good for me to start there,
Yeah.
to have a legal basis on that, because there is some legislation pending in this regard, because transparency is highly valued, not only by employees and candidates, but also from a legislative perspective. So there is currently a directive in the European Union pending. It has been approved by the Parliament, but it still needs to be approved by the Commission as well. So this is something for the future in 3-4 years, I believe. But it provides for an obligation of every member state to implement local legislation with regards to transparency on payment, basically on salaries. And that affects the recruitment phase, but it also affects the employment phase itself. So for instance, based on that new directive, if it ever were to be implemented here, you should in fact already indicate in your vacancy the range, the salary range that is applicable for that particular position. And also what the average could be within the company. That's also something that employers should be aware of, because that will also be an obligation for employers to have an average of salary payment throughout the entire company accessible to every employee. So there's transparency there. And last year already a new directive was implemented, but that was more due to transparent employment conditions. So not really related to salary, but more to what an employee can expect when entering into employment with the company. So there's more strict regulations with regards to what you have to include in writing in your contracts. And then it's good to already set expectations at an earlier stage within the recruitment phase, so that employees know what to expect when they actually receive the employment agreement to sign.
Yeah.
Can I add one very quick thing there? I think particularly because we were talking about millennials and even Gen Z being on the job market now, they won't apply for positions unless they see a salary. And I think it's really important that we already start to change these habits.
Yeah, we're going to. Like the research from the last few months have shown it. So we are doing employer branding, like you mentioned at the beginning, like one of the things you really have to get onto. And salary ranges are just part of that. You have to tell them upfront what you offer. And I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
As a company, you should know what you pay, make sure it's fair, and then why not share it?
Yeah, and it's also about managing expectations just generally of employees. I think also from a slightly legal perspective, letting people know what your process is going to look like, how many rounds there's going to be and things like that. There's something to be said for that as well. It doesn't have to be in the advert at the beginning. But what does need to be in your advert is, for example, what you're going to do with the privacy rules. How long are you going to keep the information on file and those kinds of things? But also, are you going to do background checks? You know, how often do companies surprise people and suddenly say, "Oh, and you've got to do a criminal record check," or we're going to do references, but they never asked up front. They're all things that just kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works, you know. And if you're upfront and transparent and manage those expectations, then everyone knows where they're at. And I think as well with the salary, I mean, we've found with recruiting that sometimes we had to have those salary conversations earlier rather than later, whereas you used to wait till the end. We tend to do it now, almost kind of have a rough range already agreed after a first interview to see if it's even worth continuing.
Before. Yeah, it's already like my first call's like, hey, just so you know, this is the range. Are you okay? Cool, let's move on.
Yeah.
But then might as well put it online.
Yeah, and we're at the hands of our clients as well, because from an agency perspective, if a client says they don't want us to publish a salary, we have to accept that. But at the same time, when we give them feedback 2 or 3 weeks later that we have 0 applicants, why don't we try and put a salary on the post then? And I think it's a way that our recruiters have probably have to start to educate our clients as well.
And while we think having salaries might bring more applicants, do you also think that if applicants would know the salary range from day one, would also increase the chance of them accepting the offer when that comes, basically?
Absolutely.
Because everything was so clear, set up, and transparent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it also kind of emphasizes that there is trust, there's openness, and there's equality as well with that particular company. So actually, it's a very good selling point.
And building on that, do you see that there are companies that perform the entire recruitment process remotely, where they actually don't end up seeing a candidate face-to-face until the offer is on the table? Is this something that we've seen with clients?
Yeah, I think we've seen it at Adams as well, where actually we've recruited people that we hadn't seen physically in the office, particularly during COVID time. I think we had 2 interns that we'd never met face-to-face.
I think as HR, I would have an absolute preference, though, always at least to have seen the candidate once. I notice, like with planning now and with people working hybrid, so you know, if I'm going to do an interview with a recruiter, we're not in the office on the same day in that week. So we might do a first interview, for example, on Teams in order to just expedite it a little bit. But after that, you know, a second round will always be a physical interview, because I think it's important to just look each other in the eyes. It sounds old-fashioned, but you just get so much better idea of your clique and how somebody is, and they get a much better idea of what they're coming into, because otherwise it's a bit of a black box. You know, they've seen your living room.
But I saw an Indeed survey that said that in 2022 there were more searches using the word remote than ever before, And I think it's great to actually be able to invite somebody into the office, but if that remote person is actually in a different part of the world, which is happening in many, many cases, it probably can't physically happen. It's fantastic that, that option's there, and, if somebody wants to jump on a plane, great. But I think the whole thing around remote working as well is that there's a whole different process going on in terms of our recruitment process and the way it's advertised.
I mean, it depends on the kind of company you are. I mean, for us, I do want to see a person because we're expecting the person to also come into the office when they start working for us. And if you have a company that's full remote, then obviously it's weird to ask them to come into an office that they'll never go into again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a difference, I guess.
And that builds into this kind of the other question that I had. We all go on LinkedIn and see those beautiful pictures with someone in front of a laptop, the beach behind them. And you think this is it.
Never a Wi-Fi problem.
I actually often wonder, how's the internet connection? But anyway, how do you all feel about how the remote work? There's this big discussion. It just keeps on going. It's not that big. It's been on for a couple of years now. But is it fully in the office or hybrid or fully remote? How does this conversation affect the company culture in general? What role does it play in building a company culture?
I mean, I did full remote for 6 months. And in the beginning, it was great because the office was still closed. So it was in Corona and it was perfect. No one could go into the office. So we all felt shit that we had to stay at home. But when everybody went back to the office and I was still remote, I booked a plane ride and I went to the office. Like, I didn't even go to see friends per se. I just went, it's like, I want to be in the office too. And I think that it really affected our people. You really see that people weren't happy to be at home by themselves because we have a culture where we hang out, we go out for drinks, we ski together. So for our culture, it would never work to be fully remote. And I think we faced a big problem with the onboarding actually, because we were not able to connect our culture to these people because it was only online. And I think a lot of people that we've hired in the time of Corona already left the company because they didn't get that vibe and that energy that everybody else did have when you would go into the office and connect.
I think that's the big difference that you notice with all the people you knew before when it was completely in the office. You could maintain that bond during the whole lockdown and everything. But for newer people coming in, it's just so much more difficult to identify with the company because you're just in your living room and you have a few people that you have contact with. And I also think that if it's an international company, most of our clients have a lot of international employees as well, and that has a culture of its own because they are looking for more social contact at work. That is their family. And most of those don't want to be working fully remotely. So I think I read that there was a survey done recently by TNO, and there was some 56% are doing hybrid. And I've also seen some of our clients that have gone 100% remote and are now coming back from that and saying, oh no, actually, this isn't right, this isn't working. And I kind of recognized that myself. I got quite used to sitting at home and I thought, oh, this is nice. I like this. But now I'm back in the office, I'm actually in the office more than I'm at home. And it's about that combination, but it's also about kind of tailor-made to individual needs.
But also ultimately, when there's a talent shortage, you sometimes have to fish in a different pond for that talent.
Yeah.
And if it means fishing in a different country and having somebody fully remote, but that can work for you, then why not?
But it's a big step because if that person is allowed to work fully remote, isn't everybody else?
Yeah, it sets a precedent.
Yeah.
And therefore it's particularly relevant to set up strict policies with regards to who is allowed to work remote and who is not, and based on what criteria is someone allowed to work from home. And especially if you are recruiting abroad, then it's also something to consider that digital nomad sounds great, of course, but also brings a lot of implications for companies if you have someone working outside of the Netherlands, for instance, because it triggers some tax legislation there, or it triggers especially employment law implications if someone's working abroad then local law applies. So
Yeah, and also from a health and safety perspective, you have an obligation then to look after that workspace. So I don't know where you were in those 6 months and which rules applied, or whether, sitting on the beach is probably not ergonomically sound, I'm guessing. So those
I was
photos.
working and I had a home office there.
Yeah, but with these
GDPR
photos.
compliant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
But these photos are like people sitting on the beach. If that is the case, it has been proven that there is more sickness, physical implications of people working from home, that actually there are more problems that arise with people working at home, because we think, it's okay to sit at the kitchen table and it's a bit higher and on a wooden chair.
yeah, you definitely need to have a setup as a company. You have to make sure that you can offer everything. I think everybody that fully works remote for us, and it's a small group because again we are hybrid, but we've always had a few people that started in the Netherlands, wanted to move back, and we've arranged it, but they get a full ergonomic setup. But yeah, the people that now sometimes work remote a bit, it's different for them, but it's never longer than a month now.
No, but what's also important to realise is that it might be ergonomic by Dutch standards, but you might actually fall under the local legislation and their rules. So it might not be ergonomically sound for that country. And then you have all the tax implications as well, to not even go there. So, that if they're in the country for too long, that actually they may have to have pay taxes and social security in those countries. It may even mean that the employer effectively has to set up an entity or a registration in any case in that country, and might have to pay VAT. So I think in the beginning it's something we were all very free and easy about, and we wanted to facilitate, but there are limitations to it, and practical limitations like, what's your internet connection going to be like? Are you going to actually be able to physically work and effectively work? And what do you do when there's a huge time difference there? Asynchronous working.
And that was the next question. If a client would come to you and say, hey, we would want to do this setup when everyone works remotely, where would you start the advice, basically? What would be the first thing you would tell that company?
I think it's working out what your policy is going to be, and having, again, it's about transparency and having clear guidelines of this is what is expected. You have to have a sound internet connection. You have to have this. You have to have that. It has to be properly firewalled and all these sort of things, because what kind of servers are people going to be working on? There could be real implications there. So to think through, okay, what countries are we talking about? Are we just talking about in Europe? Are we talking about different time zones? So working remotely can mean so many different things, and you have to decide, what does it mean for you, and what are the limitations of that, and to make that clear to the employee, like we will facilitate as long as it doesn't have any tax implications for us, and limited amounts of okay, well, I'm going to have to get advice about whether that place, your working station in that country is in conformance with the rules of that country, and that involves extra hassle and extra advice for clients.
But one of the positives that came out of last year, though, with the hardships in finding people, is that companies suddenly said, okay, this person doesn't need to just live in the Randstad area of the Netherlands. If they live in Eindhoven, it's fine. If they can come into the office one day a month for a meeting, that's fine. So it kind of opened up a whole new, potential candidate stream for us as well.
That's a lot easier than if it's within the Netherlands, and obviously all within Europe. But if it's in South Africa, and you're expecting someone to come back from South Africa every month, who's going to cover the cost of that? And if you want to be a sort of a sustainable green employer, I guess that person's going to be flying. What's that doing to your environmental impact and things like that? There are things to consider, because if you do say that you're a very green company and yet you have all these people working remotely and flying back every month for offsites, you can then you're giving conflicting messages about your identity and about your culture.
And to go to the other extreme, and I can't believe I just called this situation extreme. What about companies that expect people to be in the office 40 hours a week? If a client would come to you and say, it's important for our company culture, we want everyone to be there 40 hours a week, what would be your immediate reaction? What would be your advice in that regard?
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, we have kind of have that experience. Some roles do have to be in the office, like an office manager, they need to be there to take deliveries and things like that. So they might expect it a little bit more, but some other people, you're just going to really narrow down your market, I think. And I guess that's your experience.
Yeah, we had to stop working with one or two specific clients because nobody wanted to work for them.
No.
40 hours in the week in the office. This, with some clients, this was even during COVID time, so that was even more horrifying. Yeah. So yeah, if the candidates won't go there, then they either change their policy or they don't get candidates.
Yeah. And I think that's what's happening. There's such a shortage at the moment anyway. You have to really have something else amazing to compensate.
I think salary is still number one, and I think flexible working / hybrid working is number two.
I think it's also linked to like autonomy, like in the Netherlands, I think it's extremely important for employees to experience autonomy in their work, but also in the fact that they can choose to go into the office. So you might say you have to come in the office at least 1 or 2 days a week. I think that's what most companies do. But they have a choice, they can choose which days they are. They can choose what they do when they get there. And I think, this sort of love of autonomy or need for autonomy is really, really important, because if you want European employees to be productive and enjoy their work and thus be retained for the company, they need to feel this. So a very top-down kind of hierarchical way of managing, which we sometimes see in certain cultures that our clients come from, just doesn't work in the Netherlands. So whereas maybe in Asia, they'd be like, yeah, sure, if you say I'm going to come to the office, I come to the office. And a Dutch person is not going to accept that. Just like that. They have rights and they have an opinion, and and that's fine. But it's our job then as well to explain a little bit to these international clients, like, this is just not the culture, and it's okay to give a little bit more freedom and space for people. And that's maybe another important sort of aspect, I think, of retention is job satisfaction. How much do you love your job and love your company? And if you have autonomy, you're much more likely to have that.
And now we're building into the company culture. How much does the company culture impact retention? Where does the company culture begin, basically?
Well, we're going to start with onboarding, I think, because obviously that's a crucial part of anybody's experience when they join a company. And I saw some stats which were quite horrifying that said 20% of people leave a company in the first 45 days because of a poor onboarding experience.
I'm sure that's higher now as well.
It might be higher.
Because I feel like people are so much stricter in the beginning, I feel like they're also easier to just leave. It's way more rigid than I think before.
Maybe. But I think also that the onboarding experience isn't just applicable to that first 30 days or whatever. It goes on much, much longer, particularly if you have a mentor or a buddy system in place as well. I think we at Adams have a great onboarding experience for our employees, and we get feedback and we constantly ask them how it was for them, and we tweak it, we modify it. We have all kinds of things in there from the moment an offer's made to the moment they start. There's constant kind of touch points to make sure that everything's okay. We make the first day a memorable one. We make sure all the tech is set up. They have a buddy all the way through the process, and we combine everything with kind of shadowing recruiters to doing their own learning. We have all kinds of videos and learning set up for everybody that joins the company. But the main thing is the feedback we get is so positive. And actually, it's nice when we talk to clients that we tell them how good our onboarding is. And quite often they want to go learn more from us as well.
How long is the process for you?
Usually it's probably an intensive 2 weeks, but it probably continues for 2 months after.
Yeah, I think we've set it up to almost 2 years now. I know it's very long, and I think that there is so your own onboarding is 30 days, which you do indeed. We have sort of like a buddy system. I think you have ironed it out a little bit more than we have, the way that I'm hearing it. But from a people and culture perspective, we have 3 sessions in the first 2 years. And the first one is about 3 to 6 months in, where we talk like, hey, how was your onboarding thus far? Are still things not clear? Then we have another one where we go into, okay, so you've been here for a year now, like what's the role, what we said, are there things missing? And then we go into a career development conversation 1.5 years, 2 years in, because employee life cycle is, I think, maybe 4 years for us generally. So it's really good to keep that going. So like our people and culture team just checks in all the time to make sure that we don't lose our great employees 1.5, 2 years in when they're ready for something new and exciting.
And that is generally what you see happening on the market, isn't it? They're saying certainly for millennials that 2 years, they're not job hopping, whereas some of us older people kind of feel like
maybe we don't
2
need
years is not
feedback as
that long.
constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's why we have it up to 2 years, because you see that's the period where people are either happy to stay or not.
Yeah.
But overall company culture, I think, has a great impact on the retention. There's great companies out there, so you better make sure that your company culture is good and that it matches with your recruitment process. So it starts with being honest to the recruiters, like, hey, this is what we do, so that you can tell an honest story. And then in their onboarding process, that they don't figure out then, like,
But it's still ridiculous that the market was so tough last year and companies still lost people because their onboarding wasn't good.
Yeah.
And I just think they've spent so much time, so much energy, so much money,
Yeah.
and they let it down because they don't have a proper onboarding in place.
Where do you think most onboarding processes fail, basically? What do you think goes wrong when something goes wrong in onboard?
I feel like the first day, like when you honestly, but like when your tech isn't set up or not the whole team isn't there. Like it's the word. It's like, oh, sorry, is your password not correct? It's like the silliest thing. But when you start, you have this nervous. You're nervous when you go to your first job, right? So you want to at least have your laptop to work and things to do on that first day, and not just sit behind your laptop here, read 100 documents, and you don't know what you do with lunch. Do you bring lunch? Do you buy it?
Yeah.
No, you share up front. Like, hey, it's your first day. This is how it's going to look.
It's again managing expectations, isn't it? And the same thing as you were saying about recruitment, the investment that you make in recruitment, and then somebody leaves after the onboarding period. I think also with company culture that you also have to really invest nowadays in the wellness of your employees, and making sure they're okay, whether it's just you've been here for so long and a check-in, but generally managers need to be in touch with their staff and looking at how they are doing. Because if you don't invest in the employee wellness, then you're going to have to invest in sick leave management. And that's a lot less fun. We do an awful lot of it. But, you want to prevent that happening because sick leave costs companies millions, absolute millions. And 1/3 of that sick leave actually at the moment is due to mental illness or mental complaints. And I don't have statistics on it, but I would dare say that at least half of that could be prevented if the employees got the right attention at the right time. And it doesn't always have to be very exciting, employee assistance programs and psychologists and things like that. But sometimes just, a manager that checks in with you every now and again and is really interested in how are you doing and are you okay? Or pointing out, you seemed a bit quiet yesterday in a team meeting. Are you okay? And just having that open dialogue. I'm a big fan of that. But then you need to equip your managers to do that. And so many managers are just kind of focused on tasks and getting the work done that they forget to see the people and ignore the signs. Being alert to the signs of sick leave and sort of pending burnout is so important in this day and age, and especially again with millennials and Gen Z, that they're really suffering after Corona, and they really need some extra attention here and there. And it's just such a waste if you think, for the same money you could have invested that in preventing it rather than having to deal with it. Because I think I read on average as well, 279 days somebody on average is out with a burnout. Once they go off, they stay off. And that I actually thought that was quite quick based on what I've seen. So that is very much an average, and the sooner they go off, actually, sometimes the sooner they are back and they can recover because they haven't exhausted themselves so much. So I think that attention, just that kind of openness and people orientedness is so important.
Yeah, I think as a company, like if someone doesn't feel it, just go home, have a day, turn off your laptop. It's fine. We all have those days. And I think normalizing it as well. And I think one of our founders has always been super open, and I'm very open as well about, I see a psychologist. I have horrible days. Like I will send it in general. It's like, hey, people, I've had a really bad week. I've missed all the things this week. So just can you please ask me again next week? Because this is it for me. You know, I've been dealing with some stuff at home or whatever. And I think you see that people are very comfortable that way than to be like, hey, you know what? I need the afternoon off. And yeah, you don't get to the cases where people are so horribly affected and feel constant pressure at work, but feel way more comfortable saying, yeah, just need a bit of time.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you don't want to encourage it too much, because then you have people, you do have these people that abuse the Dutch system, with paid sick leave and things like that. So you don't want people going off too easily, but it's always worth that conversation. It's about the vulnerability and openness and building relationship with each other. And that is so difficult if you never ever see each other in real life, because you do build relationships so much better in a hybrid environment, at least.
On the flip side, though, there are probably so many people that are actually continuing to work through a burnout when they shouldn't even be at work.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen that in previous companies as well.
Yeah, but then sometimes, I think, we offer a service called stress counselling, where we kind of, when an employee signals, I'm struggling, I don't know what to do, that we say, let us to then at least do an intake with them, not as a counsellor, not as a psychologist, I'm just HR, but sometimes we can just help to identify the problem that they're experiencing. It might be work-life balance, it might be not being able to set boundaries. You could, especially with international employees, it's good because we know how the health system works here. So how do they get a referral in the first place for a psychologist, for example? But sometimes just that listening ear and just being able to identify, oh, actually, maybe this isn't the job for me. Sometimes it does result in people leaving, but ultimately it's good. It's better for your sort of culture and atmosphere at work if people can come to that decision before getting sick. But occasionally, I have to say, I can't believe you're still working. And I really think you need to go off. You need some time out now. And I really believe that that's in the best interest of the employer as well, because if they carry on, they're going to get sick anyway. But then it's going to last much, much longer. And the sooner you are, the quicker they are back.
And I suppose this goes back into having the right policies in place, making sure you have the setup. And, if you're an international company, you don't know how things are going to work, go to an expert and just make sure you get your basics in place.
Where you save you a lot of money in the long term quite often, because, sick leave costs companies an awful lot of money.
Yeah. And building into the next part, what are the benefits that companies can think of when they start hiring, when they're looking for talent here? What are kind of typical benefits, and what are the nice to have, basically?
Yeah, I think I should start with that, to just set some basic rules here in the Netherlands. But I want to start with that I think that you need to treat your employees equally, that will also contribute to a positive company culture. And also, of course, there are some legislations in that regard with regard to anti-discrimination, equal treatment, equal pay for equal work. And with regards to primary terms of employment, that's difficult because there are a lot of subjective reasons for why someone is earning more money than someone else. But you see also in the European Union, that directive that I was talking about earlier, that also equal pay and minimizing the gender pay gap is a hot topic. And you see that it's also something that is currently in the market. So you need to make sure that you have policies in place, that your secondary employment conditions are the same for everyone, and that's transparent as well. So that to begin. But with regards to the benefits which you must offer your employees, of course, there's the minimum wage in the Netherlands. It's about 1,934 euros and 40 cents, I know.
Approximately.
Yeah, and that's an amount exclusive of vacation pay. Especially international companies often ask what is vacation pay and why should it be paid? Well, it's statutory, it's 8%. And if you do not talk about vacation pay, then that's considered not inclusive of the total payment package you discussed with the candidates. So it's good to bear that in mind, to always indicate that you offer a salary inclusive of the 8% vacation allowance, or add that it will be added to it. That's also okay. Of course, there will be statutory deductions applicable to the salary, so that's also mandatory. not really a benefit, but it's mandatory to do that. Furthermore, as Esme also discussed, sickness, 70% of the salary should be continued, be paid during sickness. So that's also mandatory. The legal bare minimum, which can be maximized to the daily wage as well.
And for 2 years, are they saying?
For 2 years,
Which
yes.
is quite a long time for our international clients.
Yeah.
It's often quite shocking.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention that.
Oh, sorry.
No, but that's indeed worst case scenario. It can even be a little bit longer if you did not comply with your obligations during the sickness as well. So it's good to be on top of that once that occurs. And also there may be sectors that fall under the scope of a collective labor agreement. That's also good to mention here, is that you are not entirely free in that scenario, because then you are obliged to at least pay the minimum as stipulated in that particular CLA. But if that's not the case and no CLA is applicable to you, you can basically offer your employee whatever you like. Except if you have mandatory training, that's something that should be taken into account as well. If you work in a sector that a Dutch law or European law prescribes mandatory training, then that training should be offered costless and during working hours, basically. So I think that are the bare minimums to consider. And there, of course, are a lot of opportunities to spice that up a bit. But I think that the HR ladies can talk more about that.
Yeah, I can maybe add on to that. So like you mentioned, the bare minimum legally is what a lot of clients would choose for automatically, because that's what you find when you Google, what do I have to do in Holland? But actually the market norm is higher than that. So for example, the payment during sickness, it's quite common to pay 100% for the first year and 70% for the second year, for example, or at least to maximize it at the maximum daily wage. But also things like vacation days per year, actually normally, legally, there's only 20. Everyone generally thinks it's 25 because that is the norm. Again, 25 is pretty much the absolute minimum that you can give in terms of that. Pension is not obligatory in the Netherlands, which is quite unusual since it's such a pension country, but 90-something% of all companies do have some kind of pension plan. For small employers, that's not always very interesting, or it's expensive to get advice on that and stuff like that. Sometimes they choose then to give like a gross contribution towards a pension, although you have no way of knowing if the employee actually invests that in a pension or not. So you're not really looking after them. And then you might also be missing some good insurances, some unemployment or not unemployment, disability, long-term disability insurances, which are usually included in a pension, then get forgotten. And then suddenly, if an employee would suddenly die, then they're not insured for anything and their family don't get anything. And that's something that sometimes international companies are a bit confronted by. Commuting allowance, very common in the Netherlands. Again, not mandatory at the moment, 21 cents per kilometre or the 100% price of public transport tickets. Again, for other jurisdictions, that's really quite unusual to actually give your employees something to travel. The working from home allowance, which has recently, sort of come into play really through the whole COVID period, and is now being given a tax status, so it can be given tax-free to employees, and that's quite common now. And I would certainly say if you normally do a travel allowance and your employees are working hybrid, it makes sense to give them a working from home allowance for the other days, because you're not paying for their travel costs on those days. So it's kind of the same equation. So that's really common. Sometimes you see bonus schemes, obviously, as extra incentives, although personally, I don't believe that bonuses really incentivize. They tend to just... that's
the data shows is pretty clear. Unless maybe if you're a company that only wants to go for money, when you go what kind of culture you want, then you get the people that really do like it. And the competitive spirit, and maybe the sales organisation.
And last year we saw so many companies offering sign-on bonuses as well as stay bonuses in some cases, which was the first.
Yeah, again, then I think the whole equality thing, though, that's the issue. Is like, when do you offer that and when do you not? Is it just when somebody, negotiates very well that you just need to get them to sign? I just think if they're not going to sign without a sign-on bonus, then they're not going to sign. They're not going to stay very long.
Yeah.
If it's money that's motivating them, they'll soon be able to find somewhere else that's going to give them 500 euros more. And I really don't believe that in the end you're going to keep people on.
I think the relocation bonus does work though, because that means that because if you do live somewhere else, you want to move, but it's difficult because all of a sudden you need to find a house in the Netherlands. Good luck on Airbnb if you want to go to Amsterdam or Utrecht and stay there for a month. So I think that's definitely
different. Yeah.
a good benefit that if you do want to hire people that aren't in the Netherlands, to offer that, because it takes away a lot of stress. And I think what you really see as new benefits, it's a lot about well-being. So it's either companies like Open Up, so free psychological help. You see a lot on like OneFit, so subscriptions for sports, and I think way more focus on health in a holistic view are benefits that definitely are being added more and more.
Yeah, maybe also on like work-life balance. So this idea, the whole idea, of course, the new legislation on paid parental leave, additional birth leave, all of those things. And sometimes some employers are starting to sort of say, actually, we're going to supplement them because they are paid at 70% by the government, the Dutch government, but we will supplement up to 100 or 100% or up to or beyond the maximum that the reimbursement comes for, to really enable people to spend time with their families and to keep their lives in balance.
Yeah, we do that as well. We do it up to 100%. It's also from the equality perspective, because if you want to go towards a situation where both parents can both take their time without financial impact, you actually create way more space for women that are generally paid less to take the same time as the men who generally are paid more. So it's quite a benefit from that perspective as well.
Equality.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to benefits, so you've got the minimum legal, and then you have the benefits that will make sure you don't stay behind, and then you have the ones that will get you in a competitive mode. I didn't hear anything about a ping pong table, fruit in the office. Do we not see those as benefits anymore?
I think that's the bare minimum.
That is the bare minimum. Okay.
I think that's a little bit of culture forming as well, isn't it? That kind of doing stuff, fun stuff together.
Yeah.
It's not so much about the financial benefit, but it's
I think 3 or 4 years ago, those are the things that you'd see in a job description. Not anymore. No. They focus on the real benefits now.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot about the amazing company culture, but I think everyone tends to define that amazing company culture in their own way. What would you advise a company that comes from a different country, is just forming their office here? Where would they start to build the company culture, basically? How would they have to bring the company culture they have in their home country, or would you look at building an international oriented culture formed here?
I would definitely do that. I've worked at a lot of companies where they would either acquire businesses here in Europe or would start them up. And you deal with such different ways of life. When we spoke earlier about autonomy, you setting up a company here with this full-on American culture, and you want to get Dutch people in, maybe if you pay a lot of money, that might be, then you might become successful, but it's probably not going to be a super healthy, fun environment where more people want to join. And especially the Gen Z and millennials, obviously we still need to make money, it's got to be paid, but we want to be happy and we want to enjoy coming to work. So I would definitely recommend trying to build an international culture, and also not a Dutch culture. It's not, I'm going to the Netherlands, want to have an international, create an international vibe. Make sure you celebrate not just Dutch holidays, but also other holidays. Make sure that you really think about every bit of policy that you set up. Don't put, thongs in your policy if if you're not in Australia, because it means something else here.
Absolutely.
I've been there. I've had that. It was a weird conversation when someone came up to me and asked me, am I not allowed to wear that? Yeah, it's not great. So make sure that you take the appropriate steps, definitely.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies try and do that with their whole kind of their employment law as well, and everything is there's this assumption like I just want everything to be the same, or I want to harmonize across all the countries. So in whatever country we give 18 weeks family leave, I want to do the same in the Netherlands, and that's all very well. You can do a construction of that, but if you don't label parts of that, this is birth leave, this is parental leave, then you can't get the reimbursement because the conditions are different. And so it ends up costing the company more. So it does require a certain open mind and an informedness of the client to sort of think, yeah, you know, there's some good things in my company culture at home, but to get advice about that and how does that transpose into the Dutch international situation, and which things are just totally, you know, unheard of in the Netherlands and would not be appreciated whatsoever, and being flexible in that. But that's a task for the people that are bringing over the culture, because quite often there's one person sent ahead to lay the foundations. Yeah. But then maybe they need like an intercultural training. There's plenty of them available about, okay, what is it like in the Netherlands to work, even if it's an international environment and not a strict Dutch one.
And I think throughout our experience, the companies that have been the most successful in setting up a new office were the ones that came and said, okay, this is where I want to be. What do I need to do to get there? What are the steps? And then they would go to professionals to get that information when they get started. I think there's also, you have to be realistic about the timeframes. I think most companies would want an up and running new office next week. I think we have to realize sometimes it takes weeks or even months to get there. And because our time is actually up, the hour is up for this afternoon. There is an email address already kind of included in the webinar. Everyone will receive a recording tomorrow, but if you have particular questions, my advice is to send them all to the general email address connected to the webinar, and then we'll try to take them one by one. If you have a question that's addressed to any one of us in particular, please mention that in your email. If it's addressed to all of us, we'll make sure we'll redistribute the questions and come back to you via email with any kind of practical questions that you have or any follow-ups. I realize 1 hour is definitely not sufficient for everything that we had to cover this afternoon. I hope this was helpful. It's definitely a very nice exchange of information. We see different angles of the same situation with our clients. And on that note, I would like to thank everyone for the participation and for your time this afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed and it was informative. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.